Today in the kitchen, we're going to be cooking Dexter a healthy beef meatloaf. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to take my organic butternut squash and I want to go ahead and prepare this. So what I do is I just cut the top off with a nice sharp knife, cut the bottom off with a nice sharp knife. Be really careful. And then I like to make it in half one more time just to make it a little easier to handle. And then I'm going to cut off the edges here with my knife. By cutting the bottom off, it makes it nice and easy to set up here. And we're just cutting this rind. And since this is going to be a meatloaf, we want to make sure that everything we're using is really nice and finely chopped. That way it blends really well together. So get that last little bit. And I'm actually only going to need a cup of his organic butternut squash, so I think this is going to do it for now. And I got the part that actually doesn't have any of the seeds. So if you're using a part that has the seeds, we're going to want to make sure we clear those out. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to dice it really small. You just want to be really careful. I'm just turning it over little bits. Oops. Sharp knives. Again, really small here. And I'm probably going to use just half of that to chop up. I'm just going to dice this up in little pieces. If you have a food processor or a grinder, you can use that as well, and that'll really get it nice and fine. I do have both, but I decided just to chop today. A little less work. Again, just nice and small. Doesn't have to be perfect. They're not going to mind a few chunks in there. Don't want to get that rind in there. Just coming back around. Alright. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my 1 cup measuring cup and see what I got going. Just going to be really careful again. And there we go. Wow. Looks like that was a pretty good judge. So there we go. So there's our 1 cup of butternut squash. And I'm just going to put that right into the bowl right now. So here's going to be my mixing bowl. So it's the first thing in. So with the rest of our butternut squash, what you can do is go ahead and chop it up and put it in a glass container and then stick it in your freezer, and then you'll have your butternut squash for another recipe. After your butternut squash, the next thing we're going to use is 1 organic apple. So I have this apple and I'm going to go ahead and take off the stem here by just spinning it and turning it. And then I do want to go ahead and take off the skin. After your skin's removed, then I'm going to take this handy core cutter, and I'm just going to place it over the top of my apple and push down. And then it removes the cord with all the nasty seeds. Then I want to take my knife and I want to chop this apple nice and finely so that I can put it in the meatloaf mix. And then I'm going to put my apples right along in with my butternut squash. So when we're cooking for our dogs, we want to remember that we need lots of meat. I tend to shoot for about 70% meat. And the other 30% I use fruits and vegetables. You can use grains if you would like. They do have some nice properties. But you only want to use a small portion, maybe like 5% of that. Alright, so there's my apple along with my butternut squash. And then next up, we're going to continue with our color. And I'm going to go for some green broccoli. So all these fruits and vegetables have already been washed, just so you know. But I'm going to go ahead and take these little broccoli leaves off. And I do just kind of get those ugly pieces off. The stalk of the broccoli is healthy as well. So you can use that. Alright, so I'm going to take that broccoli and again, cut it nice and fine. Watch your fingers, especially if you have a nice sharp knife. You just want to kind of keep keep on moving. See, I kind of touched my finger there. We're gonna about ready to have a different kind of video with me going to the hospital. That would not have been good. Alright, so take that random leaf out. And with vegetables, particularly things like broccoli, we really do want to make sure that they're nice and fine or cooked well, because dogs don't digest them as well. So the smaller they are, the easier it is for them to digest, because they really have nice nutritional value. So we still want to give them to them, but we just want to help them digest it. Alright, so once that's nice and fine, pop that right into the bowl along with the other ingredients. Alright. So when I'm shopping for Dexter's grocery list, when I'm looking at my fruits and vegetables, I tend to look for color, because everything with a different color tends to have different vitamins and nutrients. So right now we have our orange, our butternut squash. We have a real light white with our apple, but it actually had a red skin, so that's the color I'm looking at. And then we have our green for our broccoli. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and do some blueberries. So they've already been washed, and I think these are going to be small enough and work out really nicely by just sticking them whole. Might be an extra taste treat for Dexter. So next up is I'm going to use some red strawberries. And we're going to grab 3 big ones, or depending on the size, 6 small ones. I do want to take off the stem here. Just chop that to the side. And Dexter's garden is going well right now, but not good enough yet where his own strawberries are growing. So these are store-bought, organic. Chop that stalk off there. Get rid of that. And I do tend to go with my fruits and vegetables first when I'm cooking, just so that I'm not working with lots of contamination problems. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to chop those up nice and fine. And these smell really good, so these are definitely nice and fresh. Maybe Dexter will share some of the strawberries with me. And this meatloaf, even though it's dog meatloaf, it is human friendly. So this is a recipe that you can share with your dog. We will use organ meat, but we're going to use more muscle meat, so you probably won't even taste it by the time it's added in. So if you give it a taste, let me know in the forum what you thought of it. Alright, so we're going to put that strawberry right in there. I can feel that nice moisture. Very nice and moisturizing. Sure, on a nice summer day, your dogs would really appreciate a strawberry from the garden. Alright. So next up, we're going to add some green kale. This kale I got today was actually purple kale. So with the kale, we are going to remove this heavy-duty stalk. I'm just going to cut that to the side. And I usually, so if you see, like that, I usually just fold it in half, and then I just kind of cut around, that center there. Doesn't have to be perfect. And once that's removed, I just start to kind of fold it, and just start chopping away. Kale's a really nice choice for some greens, especially if you have a dog who has oxalates in their urine. Kale is low in oxalates, where spinach is actually higher in oxalates. So if you have a dog who has crystals, you might want to be cautious about spinach. Alright. So I've been watching some cooking shows on the cooking channels, and I'm hoping to improve some of my knife skills. So maybe over these episodes you'll see some changing. Alright, so we're going to toss that right in there as well. Alright. So with that kale, it did kind of leave my hands a little goopy, so I'm going to go ahead and wash them really quickly, and then we're going to get to the ginger. Next up, we're going to use our ginger. Ginger is wonderful, especially for dogs that have upset bellies, but we do want to use a small quantity of it because too much can cause some issues as well. So we're going to take our ginger, and I'm just going to take a peeler, and I'm going to peel that skin right off. It's pretty easy to do, except for when you're trying to get into these little nooks. That can be a bit of a challenge, so you'll see I usually end up cutting those off while I'm working it. But taking that skin off right here, not too bad. Just kind of get a rough peel going. Ooh, I can smell that ginger. My eyes might start watering in this video. Alright, so I'm going to take those nooks, and I'm just going to cut through them. And I am feeling my eyes water. Alright. And that'll help me be able to clean that up a little bit better. The other option you can do is you can actually cut it. So you can cut the edges off to remove that skin. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually use 1 tablespoon of fresh ginger. So I'm going to take our little grater here, or you can use a zester. This one just happens to have a little tiny zester attached. Now watch your fingers because the ginger isn't very large, so you don't want to cut your fingers up. So we're just going to start zesting it. And again, watch those fingers. And you just turn it. As it starts getting flat on one side, just turn it around. Boy, they always talk about smell-o-vision TV. If you could smell this fresh ginger, it smells pretty good. I'm not usually a spicy person, but it smells pretty nice. Alright, so I'm getting to the edge here. I want to be really careful. Alright, so let's see how much I got here. So I'm going to take my tablespoon and pop it in there. It looks like we have a little room for some more. So I'm going to take my next one. I'm going to look for the biggest one to make it easier to hold on to. Alright, so that finishes it off. So I'm going to pop that right into the bowl here. Alright, so I'm going to set that ginger aside. And again, I can save that into the refrigerator for a few days to keep it nice and fresh. Next up is we have our eggs. So I have 8 organic eggs, and I'm just going to crack them right inside this bowl. And since I have these bowls up front, I'm just going to put my eggshells right there. And what I've heard is that they're really good for the garden. So I will crush them up and add them to Dexter's garden. And inside, what you'll see are some nice eggs with our fruits and vegetables. So I want to incorporate this all together. I want to bust open those egg yolks. By incorporating it now, it'll make it a lot easier once I add that meat. And I want to make sure that that ginger gets dispersed as well because it's kind of a nice solid mass in there. Alright, once that's all incorporated, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my meat. So I took my meat out of the refrigerator, and what I'm using today is I have 3 pounds of lean, organic, ground beef. My butcher was able to do this ahead of time. It makes life a lot easier. You can buy lean hamburger in the grocery store, but again, make sure we're looking for hormone-free, antibiotic-free, and lean. You don't want it to be too fatty. And then we're just going to dump that in there. You can also get beef chunks, and again, if you have your own grinder, you can grind it up yourself. And then what I have is 1 pound of beef organs. This is actually 1 pound of beef organ meat. It has all the organs. We have liver, we have kidney, we have heart, and then it was all ground together. So that way I can just toss it in. And it gets a little bit of everything that way. So next we have to incorporate this beef along with our vegetables and our fruit and our egg in there. So we can do it with a spoon and we can start moving it around, or we can get a little down and dirty, which is what I'm going to do. You can use gloves if you like. And then we just kind of squish it around in there until everything's incorporated. That was a pretty dirty job. But once everything's incorporated, the next thing I'm gonna do is, you guessed it, I'm gonna clean up really nicely in the sink to get all this meat off of my hands. So I'm a bit of a germaphobe, so moving it around with my hands is kind of gross. So again, you can use the spoon if you'd like, or if you have a food processor, you can blend it all in the food processor or even a mixer. So the oven's been preheated at 350 degrees. And next I'm going to get my glass jars. I'm not sure how many I'm going to need yet, so I'm just going to start with the biggest one and work my way down. You can also use muffin tins if you'd like to have little single servings, but that just means more cleanup for me. So I start with the biggest one and see what I can get in there. So I'm just going to start popping it in. You see it's been well incorporated. And we see how this is fresh, real food for our dogs. It's not processed. We know where the ingredients came from, especially if you're working with a local farmer who uses organic feed or grass-fed beef, no chemicals, no hormones, no antibiotics, and you can feel really good about what you're feeding your dog. Even if you're using the worst meat that you can find in the grocery store, which of course I hope you're not, it's going to be better than what you find in most dry pet foods. Most dog food companies are using the leftovers from the human food plants, and they've actually been laying around on the floor, getting moldy and spoiled. Then they throw them into a garbage can, wait for about a week until someone comes and picks it up, a rendering plant, and then that rendering plant takes that meat and cooks it with a slurry of chemicals to get rid of all that spoilage, and that's what we end up with in the pet food industry. Now granted, not every single pet food company is like that, and if you're wondering, you can always check out the pet food company's websites, and if they're not listing their practices on what kind of meats they're using, specifically how they're raised and how they're processed, then it's probably not going to be very good. The pet food companies that are actually really trying to work hard at bringing your dogs really healthy and good food, usually they're talking about their practices and they're talking about how healthy their cows are and where their food's raised. So as you can see right here, this is, I think, a little low for this pan, so I'm going to actually transfer it over to this pan. And then into the oven we go at 350. So let's take a look at Dexter's meatloaf and see how it's doing. And that looks really good. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it out and let it sit up here to rest. So now that Dexter's meatloafs have fully cooled, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to dish out the meatloaf and put it in these glass containers so that I can put one in the refrigerator and then the rest go into the freezer. So I'm going to grab one of Dexter's meatloafs. And since he gets a cup and a half a day, I actually portion out 2 days of food in one of these glass jars. So that'd be 3 cups. So I have my measuring cup, and I'm just going to go ahead and take this spatula here, and I'm just going to kind of chunk it up a little bit, just to make it a little easier to navigate and to get in here. So making meatloafs is definitely one way to go to feed your dog a nice healthy meal. I tend to use the slow cooker for the most part for Dexter, but I thought it'd be fun and give him a little different taste by having a meatloaf. You can do whatever you like. You can either put it in a meatloaf, or you can just put it all in the slow cooker and just let it slow cook all day long. So this recipe, if you didn't want to make it a meatloaf, you just put it in a slow cooker, add water to the top, and let it cook on low for about 8 hours. When it comes time to feed your dog, you want to make sure his meal is room temperature. You can either do that by setting it out on the counter for a little bit or adding a little warm water. I tend to use the warm water because if I set the food on the counter, Nutter, the cat, he's up here in a flash. So the last thing right now is, do I want to taste this meatloaf? And when I'm looking at it, I actually see some of the berries, so I think maybe I'll take a little taste. And I'm not big on meat. I like chicken, so we'll see. All right, I'll take another piece here. It's actually not bad. Could use a little more flavor. Definitely something that you could eat, maybe spice it up a little bit. But more importantly, we want to see if Dexter still thinks it's pretty tasty. So I'm going to go ahead and spoon feed him a little bit. Would you sit? And see if he can open his mouth really wide. Are you ready? And he can. So, to help me with the dishes, I'm actually going to put his little snoot on. And this is why he likes watching me cook. And I'll take his pan. Are you ready? Okay. I also want to note that when it comes time to feed your dogs, you also want to make sure they're getting enough vitamin D. So I use a little vitamin D supplement once in the morning. And then we also want to make sure they get their trace minerals and phosphates and calcium proportioned. So I actually use some minerals as well, again, once a day. It's just a little scoop for Dexter, and he doesn't even taste it with the rest of his food. So hopefully your dog, and maybe even you, will enjoy this meatloaf. If you do give it a try, let me know in the forum, and I'll talk to you in the next meal.